Hello and welcome to our event. For any of our first timers, I know I just mentioned there's a few of you here today, this free grant workshop is one of our Instrumentl educational webinars. Our goal is to focus on the challenges that grant seekers are trying to solve while identifying tools and sharing resources to support them along the way. Today, you're all here for You Won the Grant, Now What? And that's the question we're going to be answering. Whether you're an in-house grant pro or a consultant managing multiple clients, this session is about what happens after the award letter lands and how to begin building those repeatable successes from that win. For those of you who don't know who we are, we've been building the most loved all-in-one grants platform for grant prospecting, tracking, and management for over a decade. At Instrumentl, the roadblocks, the obstacles, the hurdles that are faced by grant seekers are what drive us toward our goal, a better approach to grants. We're helping over 4,500 nonprofits and grant consultants make their work feel effortless, and you'll get to see this in action in just a little bit. But before we get to that, let's talk about what we're actually going to be doing here today. Our event will run about 90 minutes, and this is a really special workshop. We're combining that workshop aspect with an exciting expert discussion. We are recording today's session, so tomorrow you'll get the full recording in your inbox along with some extra resources. And for those of you who are CFRE certified, this session is eligible for 1.5 CFRE points. So I encourage you to stick around till the very end because you won't be leaving today's workshop empty-handed. In addition for the chance to win an exciting raffle prize, which I'll share in just one moment, you'll leave today's workshop with a customizable, ready-to-use grant launch brief. This is a simple template to help you kick off every award with clarity, structure, as well as apply the best practices we're highlighting across today's event in one simple doc. Next, you'll practice creating a centralized workspace to manage what matters. So you'll see how Instrumentl's all-in-one tracking tools can support your nonprofit post-award management goals and put it to the test with a really practical walkthrough. For all of you Instrumentl users in the room, this will be a great refresh or even a dive into features that you maybe haven't tried out yet. And for all of you in the room who aren't using Instrumentl, fear not, we'll get you in there today with this special workshop access so you can play around in there and explore what grant management looks like in a platform that's really dedicated to making that process easier. And finally, this is super exciting here, but we'll get a first look at what's coming next with Instrumentl. This crew in the room with me here today is really getting something special, the first ever preview. And we've got our co-founder in the room with us today to share exactly what it is we're talking about. It's something brand new for post-award pros, and you guys will all be the very first to see it. And lastly, I mentioned that raffle prize, but if you stay here until the end and submit that feedback form, you could be the lucky winner of our raffle today. Our community of grant professionals, all of you folks in the room, is made up of some of the most selfless people we know, and we'd love to share a self-care box as well as a $100 donation to the charity of your choice with one of our feedback survey respondents today. We'll share another reminder about this and a few other opportunities to maybe earn a couple of extra raffle tickets, but stick around to the very end of our time together to be eligible for this fun prize. And to start us off, I want to introduce myself and the Instrumentl team putting on this event. My name is Shaylee, and I'm an events and community manager here at Instrumentl. My job is to develop educational events like this one to share with our community. I love spending time with our nonprofit and grant professionals to learn more about what's working and what's not, and I always love seeing folks' comments in the chat come in, so keep on doing that. And I'd love for all of you folks to meet another member of our team who helped bring today's session to life. Nia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nia. I'm also an events and community manager here. Some of you may know me. I certainly know a lot of you here in the chat. Rebecca, Kira, Leah, it's so good to see you all and so many new faces too. So welcome. We're so excited to have you here with us today. I actually come from the nonprofit world. So prior to this, I worked in rainforest conservation and research. This time right here, getting to spend an hour or two with hundreds of other nonprofit professionals is really my jam. So thanks for being here today, y'all. It's going to be a fun one.
So, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about where we're headed. First, we'll talk about why post-award grant management really matters. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, so our goal will be identifying exactly why getting this part right sets you up for long-term success. We've summarized 3 aspirational goals for the most effective post-award management based on research and in-depth sector interviews with our community of really experienced grant professionals. So here what we've really done is the hard work for you. We've taken their insights about what's working and what's not and turned it into really tactical advice for you to apply today, right after this session. You'll also get to put some of those tips into action during the workshop. And after that, we'll shift into a live panel discussion with our experts from across the field. I'll be introing those folks in just a bit, but to give you a little sneak peek, our panelists run the gamut. We've got an in-house giving officer, the founder and CEO of a nationally recognized grant writing and grant consultancy firm, and an Instrumentl product manager who is conducting extensive research on the challenges you all face the most across the sector every single day. And finally, we'll wrap up with the live Q&A so you can get answers to some of your specific questions. I see a few folks asking about the recording, so I just wanted to reiterate, you will be getting the recording at the end of today's session. Okay, so super exciting. You won the grant, and as you all know, there is no small feat. So let's pause and take a moment to celebrate that. Drop in one word, or maybe even in one emoji, how you usually feel right after winning a grant. I'll wait here so you can all watch me try to read some of those emojis out loud. I see a fire emoji. I see exhilarated from Catherine. Huzzah from Elizabeth. Lots of party emojis. Love that one. Cool guy emoji from Mary. Relief, terrified, rewarding. Happy tears, hopefully. Happy relieved. Already working on the next one. This is great. Honored, Leah. That is so true. Plenty of you folks are talking about here already on to the next, and that is no surprise. I know all you folks are super busy here. Getting to this point of exhilaration takes a ton of effort. You've done prospect research, cultivation, writing, approvals. It is a really complex and strategic process. So when that award letter comes through, whether it's for $5,000 or $500,000, it is a huge win, and we should absolutely celebrate it. But it's also only one step. Managing the grant is where sustainable funding is built. It's when you sync up with your internal team, align on goals and timelines, and start delivering on the promises that you made in that proposal. Think of the grant life cycle like a relay race. The award letter is that baton pass, and what happens after that handoff determines whether you finish strong or maybe stumble on some of those more complicated reporting, compliance, and renewal pieces. One of the experts that we love to collaborate with, Rachel Werner, calls post-award management the broccoli of grants work. And she's not wrong, right? Compliance, policies, budget tracking, reporting, these haven't historically gotten that top billing. They're not labeled as thrilling or as compelling as discovering new funders or writing a narrative. But what Rachel always reminds us throughout her presentations is that broccoli isn't boring, it's essential. And when you know how to cook it right, it can be so powerful. Post-award is where some of that real magic happens. You build trust with funders, you prove your impact, and you lay the groundwork for renewals and long-term partnerships. So yeah, sure, it's broccoli, it might not be everyone's favorite, but it's also very strategic. And when it's cooked right, little lemon zest, a little garlic, it can be delicious. And if it doesn't feel that way yet, if your post-award process still feels a little bit clunky or chaotic, you are definitely not alone. I'm sure it's plenty of folks in the room can attest to that. Here at Instrumentl, we're thinking about that process a lot. And let's just say, hopefully, there are a few exciting new tools on the horizon designed to make this phase feel a whole lot smoother and maybe even pretty fun. Let's check in. Answer in your chat box. On a scale from 1 to 5, what would you rate your organization or clients on post-award management? I'd love to see a couple of numbers. I've seen the numbers rolling already. We've got everything from 1 to 5. Lots of threes, I'll say. Lots of folks feeling like they're in that in-between place. Awesome. Lots of threes, lots of fours. Okay, definitely some advice to be shared in this room today. 3 and rising. Love to see that progress, Robin. Ricardo, depends on the grant. So true. Definitely different elements of this throughout the different grants that you're applying for. So whether you're a 1 or a 5 or somewhere between, the thing that we've realized is that there are really clear signs for what strong post-award management looks like. So let's anchor ourselves in those 3 core goals. First, you want to make sure that you're launching every grant with clarity. So from the moment that that award letter hits your inbox, everyone involved understands what was funded, what was promised, and what that timeline looks like. This early alignment is what's going to help prevent some of that more downstream chaos. Second, your team is collaborating with shared systems. So program, finance, and grant staff are working from the same source of truth, and there's no digging through inboxes, spreadsheets, or siloed docs. and people understand what their communication expectations are. And lastly, your finances stay transparent and funder ready. So your grant budgets are tracked clearly, updated regularly, and your spend down is audit ready and paving the way for some of those renewals. So we've just mapped out our 3 big goals for strong post-award management, but every organization, whether you're saying you're at a 1 or at a 5, has some kind of rhythm, even if it's informal. So let's share in the chat. What is the first thing that your team does after winning a grant? I'll pause here to read some of those answers out loud. Breathe from Rich. That is very true. Internally celebrate. Love that. Love that. Smile. Budget with finance. So true. Add reporting tasks. Kickoff meeting. Ugh, a lot of you folks are already on it. Awesome. Love seeing these answers. Robin Store update the GMS. Create a contract from Melissa. Kickoff open file from April. Plenty of similar responses, which I think points to something really great. You know, we're all kind of on the same page about how to make this work. Frank Norman, applaud. Very true. So again, maybe some of you folks are celebrating. Sounds like a lot of you are, very rightfully. Maybe you're sending that thank you note, and maybe you just have to move on right to that next deadline. And I wouldn't blame you, right? Grant professionals have so much on their plates. But when there's a lack of alignment or when there's no moment to pause and get aligned after a grant is awarded, roles can get really fuzzy, right? You end up asking yourself who owns the budget, who's drafting reports, who's communicating with the funder. And I'm sure plenty of you have experienced the burnout from scrambling at the last minute to gather receipts or outcomes from your team. And the fix here is something that plenty of you are already doing. It's creating a repeatable kickoff process that gets everyone on the same page all the way from day one. Your kickoff meeting needs to do 3 things really well. It needs to set expectations early, clarify roles and timeline, and prevent surprises later. Ultimately, your objective here is to establish a clear start of award to mitigate for any of that stress you might feel down the line. Start your kickoff by reviewing the award letter and agreement. Highlight those really important reporting requirements, those spending restrictions, and key deliverables. Use this time to extract the critical details, due dates, and payment schedules so you can turn them into a to-do list. This is where tools like Instrumentl's AI Award Assistant or LLMs like ChatGPT can come in handy. They can help double-check your to-do list and summarize everything in that award letter for you so that you don't miss a beat. This is also your opportunity to proactively flag any unclear terms or conditions so you're not caught off guard halfway through the grant period. Next, we're going to identify all key stakeholders. So who owns what, who is responsible for payments, for reportings, for check-ins with the funder. Make sure every task from submitting reports to tracking spend to checking in with other members of the team has an owner. And make that owner super specific, names, roles, and timelines. This kind of really detailed accountability can help lead to clarity. If you're using Instrumentl, you can tag a specific person to a certain task that you create. But this is something that you can apply to any tool you're using. In spreadsheets, for example, you can add an owner column to ensure that responsibility is clearly signed and even tag folks directly in there instead of just typing out their name. And once you have all of that information you need, how you're hosting your kickoff meeting really matters. So for those larger or newer grants, you might want to hold a live team-wide meeting so that everyone can get aligned in real time and that you can build that buy-in right from the beginning. But for smaller or repeat grants, you might want to keep it lighter, right? Share a Loom video or a recap email walking through the grant launch brief and ask your team to confirm receipt and understanding. This still creates clarity without needing to block everyone's calendars. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Loom, it's a platform that you can use to record yourself and your screen at the same time so that you can send a quick personal video snippet to your team without having to get everyone in the same room. Either way, the goal here is the same, to orient your team and set them up to manage the grant confidently and consistently. This is also where that grant launch brief comes in. It's your go-to resource for capturing and sharing key grant details in one place. So we've got a list on this slide of all the different things that you're going to want to include in the grant launch brief, and we'll also drop a link in the chat for a template where we've already set up one of these for you. I'd open this up and take a look at some of those starting points you recommend having when you're getting your team aligned. And this is just a template, right? You might add things in there like an internal communications plan or omit parts that aren't relevant to your team. So I'll drop that in the chat in just a moment. I'm seeing a couple questions come in as well. We'll keep those all for the end of the session. So, once your team is aligned with that grant launch brief, the next step is keeping that clarity alive as the grant moves forward. So, where are you currently tracking those updates and progress for awarded grants? Drop some of those answers in the chat. I would love to see some of that. Monday.com, we see that one a lot. Opportunity notes, great. And Instrumentl with due dates for the tasks from Christina, love to see that. Lots of Monday and Instrumentl, a couple of spreadsheet users as well. Excel is great. Notion, we love Notion. Google Sheets, Instrumentl again. Very cool. Plenty of folks using the task feature. Love to see that. And Kelly's figuring out how to use Instrumentl. You're in the perfect place. Excel, Trello, Salesforce, plenty of great responses here. So whether you're using spreadsheets, no one's using sticky notes, which is great, or maybe you're using a combination of both, you are definitely not alone. And these tools can definitely work to meet our goals, right? I'm sure plenty of you are seeing plenty of success with Excel and Monday. But here's the thing. When all of that information lives in separate places, like maybe a couple of different spreadsheets, or maybe some spreadsheets in Google Sheets and others in Excel, or maybe even worse, all in someone's brain, it can become way too easy to drop the ball and it can become way harder to collaborate. So how do we solve for that? The first step is getting to a place where your team has shared systems, simple, standardized ways of capturing updates and context that make collaboration feel super, super easy. Let's get into some examples of how you might do this. And again, your objective here is to maintain that team clarity over the board and ensure that everyone across from programs to the grants folks to finance has exactly the information that they need. The first and most foundational step here is creating that central hub for everything related to the grant. That means storing all documents like award letters, agreements, and reporting guidelines in a single accessible location. If you're using Instrumentl, that might be your document library, or if you're using a different tool, that might be something like Google Drive, where you have specific folders that are shared with all stakeholders and titled in a way that makes them super easy to find. I see SharePoint in the chat too, and I believe you could set up something similar there. And just as important as adding all key details to a shared, and just as important as adding all key deadlines to a shared calendar. This creates visibility so that everyone on your team knows what's due and when. By centralizing this information and timelines, you set the foundation for really clear communication and fewer surprises. You're also going to want to define where and how your team tracks progress and shares updates. For this tip, I really encourage you to think about where your team already is and what the easiest way for them to share updates with you would be. So for folks that are using Teams, that might be in a Teams message. For folks that are using Gmail, that might be in a Google chat. But in this example here, if your program team happens to be in a tool like Slack, I think you can also do this in Teams, you might set a weekly recurring reminder that encourages folks to share what's happening in their day-to-day. If you're using email, you might schedule that update request for the same time on a regular cadence so folks know when to hear from you. This tip is going to end up looking a little bit different for each of you, but ultimately you're going to want to define where updates get shared, how often, and by whom. That way, progress, questions, and wins don't get buried. And to keep that communication consistent, make it as easy as possible. Automate your visibility wherever you can. So if you're using a shared calendar, maybe set up recurring calendar events for not just your big tasks like report due dates, but also for check-ins and reminders. A lot of times I'll set a task on my calendar to send my teammates a Slack about what I'm working on. If you're using a tool like Instrumentl or Monday, integrate it with your calendar so those updates flow naturally without the extra effort. The goal here is to make grant communication a reflex, and the easiest way to do this is to meet people where they are. So hopefully now you've got your team aligned, you've got that communication flowing, and you've created a really strong operational foundation. But even the best coordination can fall apart if the finances aren't clear. How are folks managing that today? I'd love to hear what folks are doing. Workday, that's a big one. Business Central and Excel from Emily. Excel from Anne. Lots of finance management in Excel. Bloomberg, Sage, Excel still, Sage. Lots of Sage and Excel I'm seeing. QuickBooks from Anne. Couple more QuickBooks folks trickling in. Very cool. Looks like we're really running the gamut in terms of the tools that we're using. Workday, NetSuite. Very cool. DonorDoc, big one. QuickBooks, Excel, awesome. So now, based on some of those responses, we're seeing a lot of those usual suspects, right? QuickBooks, spreadsheets, and again, no one said that they're just guessing, so that's phenomenal. You already know that this is a pain point, I bet, but it's really tough work tracking grant finances, and the bigger issue is what it costs you: time, accuracy, underconfidence, or even compliance. And this is definitely a really hairy problem, but in our interviews with grant experts, we had covered some insights about how to make it easier to create those clear financial systems that you really need. Your objective here is, again, building those financial systems that keep your grants on track. And the first tip for building reliability into your grant budget system is simple but powerful. Tag every transaction to the correct grant. This ensures that every dollar spent is traceable at the individual grant level. So even if you're renewing that same grant year after year after year, treat each cycle as its own award. Give it a unique code, and that way you'll know exactly what was spent, when it was spent, and what grant it belonged to. And reconciling budget versus actuals regularly is essential for accurate grant tracking. But to do this well, you need to communicate regularly with your program staff about spending. Some costs won't show up in your accounting system right away, like delayed invoices or even upcoming purchases. Talking through what's planned but not yet posted helps prevent confusion and makes it really easy to catch those issues earlier. We've mentioned this a few times before, and you'll see it in action in just a bit, but Instrumentl supports this by giving you a shared workspace to log notes, assign tasks, and track updates tied to each grant. You can also monitor your spend down progress in real time, so it's easier to catch pacing issues before they become big reporting problems. These ongoing check-ins that you might be setting up using that recurring calendar reminder can help you flag missing or misallocated expenses before they impact your reporting or your funder relationship. And once you've built those consistent reconciliation habits and aligned your teams around a single source of truth, the final piece is making sure that your internal and your external budgets are speaking the same language. Here's a quick example of what I mean. Maybe your organization has one grant ledger code for all staff salaries, but your funder actually wants that split into program personnel and administrative personnel. You'll need to decide right at the start how to allocate those salaries and track them consistently over the course of the grant. That means you'll build a spreadsheet that connects the dots between your internal grant ledger codes and the funder's reporting categories. So every time a transaction is tagged internally, you already know how it rolls up into your final report. So now you've got a full playbook. Your team is aligned, your deadlines are clear, and your finances are super trackable. But we know it's one thing to talk about these practices and a completely other thing to manage them day to day. I'm going to have Nia, who's here already, come up and take the stage to take it away.
Hi again, everyone. I can see even more familiar faces now that I'm on. 25 minutes later, hi, Alan, Rebecca. So good to see you all. I want to take the next 7 or so-ish minutes to show you how these strategies can come together in a real grant management system. So this is an Instrumentl webinar, so we're going to do this in Instrumentl, but I promise what you'll see and get to play with here can be applied to your own system. So whether it's spreadsheets or project management platforms, or maybe you are just using Instrumentl, these features are built on best practices. So I'm excited for us to really get a little hands-on with it. So for those of you who are Instrumentl customers, or maybe you started your trial recently, go ahead and open that up so you can follow along. Kelly, Mike, I know I saw y'all in the chat saying you wanted to get a refresh on some of this. I'm looking at you here. All of our first timers, go ahead and hit this special link that my colleagues are going to drop in the chat box. This link is going to give you access to Instrumentl, so it's totally free. No strings attached. You're going to have access for 2 weeks. And yes, this includes the entire grant database too. This is special access we create for workshops like this one to give you a chance to take it for a spin. Shaylee, if you can advance our slides, please. You're going to see a sign up form when you click that link. So go ahead and fill that out. Our Instrumentl customers in the room, here's your quick water break chance while we give our new friends in the room a minute to get set up here. It's 3 really easy steps. I'm with you every step of the way here. So we're just going to get started with this basic info. It's name, email address. If you've ever signed up for anything online, you know how to do this. And once you've filled that out, you'll see a screen that looks a little bit like this next one. Shaylee, if you can advance our slide, please. This is your chance to actually get one-on-one time with our grant strategist to walk through your specific needs and how Instrumentl can support them. I really encourage you to take us up on this because you can get that really specialized experience and expertise, right? But because I'm here walking you all through it right now, you can also hit that skip button and get right into the platform with me. I can see Adam in the chat saying you had a free trial previously. We're going to drop another link in the chat. So if you've had a free trial, it's expired, and you want to get a chance to get back in there and play with maybe some of the management features that you didn't explore in the past, there's a form right there that you can fill out. Is everyone following so long? Give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat once you are with me here. We have one final step to go over. This is really the fun part. Okay, I can see a lot of yeses. So I'm gonna take over screen share real quick and show you what we're gonna get up to next. So you're gonna land on a page that looks similar to this. It's gonna be your project setup. So for those of you who are Instrumentl customers, you've gone through this. For our new folks in the room, follow along for the next 2 minutes so we can just finish this setup right here. To get started, we're gonna give Instrumentl information about one of our projects. So just pick a project of yours that you're looking for grant funding for and just put in a quick description here. So mine is an outdoor education program for youth with disabilities in Illinois. Instrumentl's gonna suggest some keywords that fit your project that it'll use to find the best fit grants for you. So you're not sifting through thousands and thousands of grants, but maybe you're looking at 100 or a couple hundred that are best suited for your needs. So you can see these are the keywords it generated for me. I'm gonna go ahead and add a couple more. I think there's a few that aren't captured here that really reflect what my project is trying to do. I'm gonna do recreation as well, youth services. I'm gonna hit next. And we're gonna answer a few more questions about that same project. So I am a nonprofit, but let's say I'm partnering with an elementary school for this specific program. You're going to select what applies to you. If you have any partners, we want to select everything that would make us eligible for as many grants as possible, right? We want to see everything that's on the table for us. I am not a faith-based organization, but if you are, this is where you could indicate that. And then we're going to say where our project is taking place. So if you're truly national in scope, you can leave it at that. But if there are certain counties or cities where your project takes place, it's really helpful to add those in because you might be eligible for some ultra local grants, right? So I have 2 counties here in Illinois where like my summer camps, for example, are located. I'm going to wait for just a second to make sure everyone's following. And then we're going to look at grant sizes. So if there's a certain grant amount that you're after, you can indicate that here. Let's say I don't want anything under $1,000. It's just not worth it to me right now. But I also don't really want to deal with the nuances of like $1 million grant application, right? So I'm like anything between 1,000 and 500,000. Why not? And then what am I going to use the funds for? General operating over and over and over again. I want general operating expenses, but I also have projects, I have programs, I'm going to do education. I don't have any capital projects that I want to do for this specific program, so I'm leaving that unchecked. And then the kinds of funders that I'd like to see grants from. So I actually am going to keep federal government grants unchecked here. I'm trying to get some quick funding. I'm not trying to enter, a multi-year cycle here or do anything too rigorous. I'll take a look at state and local though, like I'll give it a chance. You'll select whatever is relevant for you here. You're gonna hit save and exit. And this is where the magic happens. So Instrumentl has matched my Illinois youth education project here with 295 active grants. So what I want you to do now, give me a thumbs up if you're still following. And I can see we have some questions in the chat here. Alan is asking some things about Instrumentl. We'll try to answer those in the chat box or maybe circle back to them later. What I want you to do, okay, thumbs up's great, you're still with me, is select any of these random grants that come up. So Down the line, when you do this intentionally, you'll spend more time looking through 990 reports, for example, so we can gauge a little bit more about what the funder is interested in, the alignment, things like that. But right now, because we're talking about management, I'm going to just go ahead and hit save right here. And this moves the grant over to our tracker. So at the top of your screen here, you can see it says tracker. I want you to click that. If you're an Instrumentl customer, yours might look a little bit like mine looks, that it's filled out. If you're brand new, yours is just gonna have that one grant that you just saved, right? So this tracker here, this is that central hub. This is our single source of truth, our home base, whatever we want to call it, right? It's our system of record. It's where all our grants, planned, awarded, closed, all of them live here, as well as the tasks that go along with them. So I'm going to walk us through some of the features that we've built here. And again, this can serve as inspiration for you if you want to recreate something similar in your own systems, or if you're in your own Instrumentl account right now, maybe like a refresher on what are some of those things that you can be utilizing a little bit more. So the first thing I want to call out is this goal right here. So you can actually indicate what your grant funding goal is for each fiscal year. So that way we can make sure that all of these grants that we're tracking, that we're researching, that we're applying for, they're all laddering up to a larger goal. And it's always front and center here. I think this is a really underrated thing. I don't see a lot of people utilize this as much as I would like it to. I think it's so great to have that aspirational view of like, this is what we're trying to get to. So again, if you're using like a spreadsheet or you're using a project management tool, do you have somewhere where you're saying what your actual goal is for that year or the next 2 fiscal years? All right, the next thing, let's go with status. This is such a simple thing, but what I love about these status categories is that they're standardized. So what that means is Instrumentl gives you all of these options for what status your grant is going to be in. So if there's multiple people in here researching grants, working on grants, there's a very consistent way that we're doing our record keeping. So if you're a spreadsheets person, you can build something very similar with a drop-down functionality in spreadsheets. I really encourage you to check out the categories that we have right here. I think they're really comprehensive. Feel free to replicate them. Here's an example of how I used them. So the green is a grant that's been awarded. It's currently active. We also have things like researching, application in progress, application submitted. So we can get really granular with, it's not just in progress, but the application's in progress or it's been submitted, right? So getting a little bit more nitty gritty with things. The next thing I want to highlight, Shaylee talked about the importance of assigning ownership directly to individuals. So this comes into play here too. Think about in your own system, do you have a place where you can visibly identify for the whole team who's responsible for something? So not only is it living on their to-do list, but everybody else knows who that go-to person is. So we have this set up within our tasks. So this is a grant that I don't have a task for yet. So let's just go ahead and add a sample task. For example, I'm thinking a site visit, and the description is I have to invite this funder to our Q4 event for a site visit. Bear with me. I'm making this up as I go. The task type, it's going to be a cultivation task. The deadline, we want to invite them by next Friday. Our event's in October. We got to get that invite out there. And I'm actually going to look to my colleague, Shaylee, to do this. So I'm assigning it to Shaylee. So what I love here is that we're mapping a specific task to a specific grant to a specific person. So it's not just this nebulous to-do list that lives in some document and we're not really sure what it relates to. It also lets us get really specific with, maybe a finance person owns a specific task for a grant, but then there's going to be another task that's owned by the programs person, right? So we're able to really get that level of granularity. We also can't talk about tasks or grants without talking about deadlines. So what's really cool here, of course, is that we have the deadline. This automatically gets synced to Instrumentl's calendar. So this is what this looks like. You can also map this to your own calendar. So if you're using Gmail, if you're using Outlook, if you're just using spreadsheets or you have a project management tool, think about how you can build something similar out for yourself. So it can be as simple as a shared calendar on Gmail that your whole team has access to. So it's not just me adding it to my calendar, but it's a shared calendar. As soon as I add an item there, everybody has access to it. It's on everybody's literal calendar. So that way, I'm not the only one with these deadlines looming over me, right? Finance is tapped in from the get-go. So, what else can we talk about here? I think notes is a great one and another really easy one to bring into your spreadsheets to things like Monday. Do you have a space where you can leave some qualitative comments? Not everything is going to fit so neatly into a drop down, right? So this qualitative comment place is really important. One best practice that I haven't implemented in this example is I love to encourage folks to also add their initials when they leave a note. So that way, when Shaylee comes in here and she sees this note here, she knows, oh, Nia left this note. Nia's done some research into this, and if I have questions, I'll go to Nia. So always making sure we're doing that ownership piece proactively. All right, I know we have a panel to get to, and we also have a really fun announcement. So, Shaylee, if we can get our slides back up here, please. We built a system we're really, really excited about, and we know that many of you love it. Maybe you're getting better with using it, right? This is just the beginning. So, we're doing a whole lot more with post-award management to make it feel easy, to make it feel clean, to make it feel fun. So, I want to invite a very special guest, Instrumentl's co-founder, Angela Brarin, here to talk us through that.
Thanks, Nia, and hi, everyone. I'm Angela. I'm one of the co-founders of Instrumentl, and I lead all things engineering, product, and design here. I'm here today with all of you to make a big announcement. And I'll start by sharing that over the past 4 years, my team and I have been studying what makes managing awards so difficult. And you've told us three things loud and clear. First, you told us that grants, programs, and finance teams, they rarely share the same view of budgets versus actuals for grants. And so it's hard to have a single source of truth, and that means collaboration can slow down and frustration can build too. And then secondly, you told us you don't have real-time visibility into how grants are spending down. There's tricky mapping you need to do between your organization's budget categories and a grant's budget categories, which are never really the same. And accounting lags behind by 30 to 45 days, so you're always looking at old numbers. And you try to get around that by creating and pulling together your own spreadsheets. And then third, you told us that reporting on how you're spending grant dollars, it drains precious hours, especially for finance teams. Each funder has their own format for reporting, and that forces you and your finance partners to do a lot of manual exports and cleanup work. So today, for the first time, I'm excited to share that Instrumentl is in development in building a new award management tool to solve those exact problems. Instrumentl has been releasing and improving some award management features in the past. Those are just the beginning. With this new award management product, you'll be able to say goodbye to spreadsheets and hello to real-time grant spend control. So here's what the new award management tool gives you. You'll have a centralized view of your awards. It's built so that your grants, finance, and programs teams can finally see the same numbers in one place. It'll also give you a live view of your spend. Your grant budget, planned expenses, and reconciled expenses from your accounting system, they all now live side by side, and they're updated in real time. And you're also going to have instant funder-ready reports. So you can download polished financial reports on a per grant basis in any time period that you need. So the result is clarity, confidence, and control of your awards across your team. And because you're here today, you have the chance to shape what this product looks like. We're opening a waitlist right now for our new award management tool. By joining the waitlist, you'll be the first to hear when this product is ready for use. You'll have the opportunity to test early versions, and you'll help influence our roadmap. So if managing awards has ever felt messy, this is your chance to change that story. Sign up for the waitlist over in our chat.
Hello, folks. So hopefully you're super excited about that. I can see that there is some excitement in the chat. I've dropped the link, so please, please, please sign up. I'll give folks a few seconds to get started with that. And when you are back in the chat, I would love to hear one thing that you've learned so far today and what you'd be excited about. And in just a few moments, as soon as folks join us again, I'll begin to introduce some of our panelists who are here with me today. I see some folks are excited to use the grant launch template. Love to see that. Rachel, Nia, and I spent a good amount of time workshopping that for you all. We love seeing Arnold's excited to hear about grant kickoff meetings. Sarah learned that the Instrumentl calendar can be shared to the Gmail calendar. How to best use notes. Awesome. Great. With that, get ready to learn even more from our super exciting panelists. So we're going to be joining a discussion about real-world grant management. We've got a set of panelists here that really run the gamut, as I mentioned earlier. I'll start by introducing Colette Rice, an institutional giving officer at YOLO Cares. Colette brings over 20 years of nonprofit experience in both grant making and grant seeking, spanning sectors from healthcare and the arts to animal welfare and beyond. For the past 6 years, she's led the full grants process at YOLO Cares, guiding everything from strategy to stewardship. And Colette, I'd love to hear from you. After winning a grant, what is your first priority?
Well, I think you really landed on a lot of it, Shaylee, in your introduction. I think the first thing we want to do is get the whole team on the same page. So we're looking at reaching out to senior leadership, programs, finance. Hopefully they all know that we've applied for this grant and that we are, hoping to get the grant. So there's usually that celebratory moment, which I highly recommend with all the work we do. We need to take a moment to say yay for ourselves. And then I'm immediately on to putting together my deliverables document list, as you outlined, and getting ready to schedule that launch meeting so we can start talking about exactly what we're going to be responsible for and who's going to be doing it over the course of the grant period.
Definitely. And we'll hear more from Colette about these exact topics in just a bit. I'd also like to welcome Kim Joyce, the founder and CEO of a national grant writing firm that has secured over $444 million in funding for clients across every sector. Recognized as a credentialed grant expert, GPA-approved trainer, and award-winning business leader, Kim brings over 20 years of experience spanning grant writing, grants management, fundraising, and nonprofit capacity building. So Kim, what is your first priority after winning a grant?
Hi, so great to see everyone today. The first thing I think, like a lot of other people already mentioned, was celebrate. We work so hard. There's so much work that goes into this. Actually, winning the grant is just so amazing. So we celebrate with our clients, and then it's getting to work, figuring out what do we need to do to track everything. We don't want to miss anything. Like Colette said, pulling the entire team together for that meeting and then getting an implementation meeting started. So program finance, admin, grants, any team members, and then creating a timeline of when we need to get things done and the workflow, and communicating early and often is something that we definitely need to do. Make sure everyone knows what they're responsible for and that nothing gets missed.
Definitely. And Thomas, I'll invite you to add some color to that question as well. Thomas Morris is a member of the product team here at Instrumentl, and he's spoken with hundreds of nonprofit organizations about their post-award management challenges and solutions. This has given him a real front row view of what makes post-award management successful and powerful.
Thanks, Shaylee. It's great to be here. I love talking about everything post-award. I've spoken with many of you directly, and I think, number one priority, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, definitely celebrate. I saw someone in the comments say, what do I do when I win? I, ask what's next. And I think it's so easy to do that, which is, there's always more to do, but definitely celebrate. And then as Colette and Kim have both just said, try to get everyone on the same page. Every customer I talk to has challenges doing this. All these teams are working in different ways. How can you communicate and be really, really clear about what you've promised to the funder, how you're going to measure it, how are you going to track it, get all these systems and teams talking to each other? That I think this post-award phase is so collaborative, and that I think is priority number one.
Definitely. I love to hear some of the themes that all three of you have shared today, and that question feeds perfectly into our first section, getting started right, post-award foundation. So Thomas, the first question I have here is for you. You've spent countless hours with nonprofit professionals hearing their post-award pain points. What are some of the most common post-award struggles you saw during your research?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think this, in my experience, this boils down to one single word, and that is silos. Most organizations that I speak with really struggle because they have the grants team, the programs team, and the finance team, and all these different teams. I call this the magic triangle because these different teams are always interacting with each other, but they don't always, they often need access to information that other teams have, but it's often really challenging to get to it. And that's partly because, finance information lives in your accounting software. Program data can live in, 100 different places. And then the grants team has, all of the grants documents, the reporting schedule, things of that sort. And so I think most, 99% of challenges that I talk through with organizations about post-award management is figuring out how to break down these silos so that the people who are involved with the grant have access to what they need. On the grant side, I think many of you are probably familiar. I get so many questions. I hear this all the time. I don't even know like how is our spend tracking on this grant? It's a really hard question to answer. Am I overspending? Am I underspending? Are we on track? Are we going to hit our programmatic goals for this grant? I hope my program team, even knows what we're supposed to be tracking for this grant. Or, I have a report due in 3 hours, but I still haven't gotten that success story that I need from my program staff. I'm going to try to make something up based on a previous report I submitted or dig into survey data and try to come up with it myself. But it's really hard to get access to that. And, on the program side, I don't know if we have any program staff in here, but there are questions, how much do I have left to spend on this grant? Can I spend money in this way? Is this allowable based on the terms of the grant? What metrics do we need to be able to track? Where are we going to track them? And on the finance side, how should I allocate this expense? What budget category should it go to? Should it go to this grant? When is this payment coming in? How often do we need to submit for reimbursement? What format? There's such a long list of questions here, and the information exists somewhere in some form, but I think the big challenge here is trying to figure out how to get this all in one place so that everyone who needs access can access it. And I think it really comes down to communicating, as we've said, really communicating, doing that grant kickoff, centralizing everything, and really deepening your collaboration so that the grants team specifically is not siloed just in kind of money fundraising world, but that the program staff is really deeply involved from the very beginning, even as early as the pre-award stage in crafting proposals, budgets. And so when you get to the post-award phase, everyone is set up for success.
Definitely. And Thomas, as you were speaking, I was watching chat comments come in. People are really resonating with those struggles. So, Colette, I'd love to ask you that when, you've kind of overcome some of those struggles in your experience and you're really in that flow with your grant management, your finance, your program, and your development teams are collaborating well. What are 1 to 2 things that you usually have in place?
I think that Thomas has really hit the nail on the head with those challenges, hasn't he? It's really exactly what I think most of us have been through. And for me, I have found that there are 2 big things that really change that. And one of those is getting clarity, and the other one is establishing a rhythm. And that means that grant launch, that all of those teams, those silos, as Thomas mentioned, are actually learning how to communicate, talk to each other, express to each other the challenges that they're each going through so that we're able to come to actually workable solutions. So I go to them at that first grant launch meeting and I've mapped out all of the deliverables, which hopefully aren't a surprise to them because, as Thomas said, they were probably involved in the pre-award process as well. They were helping me establish those deliverables based on their own plans for the coming grant period. So we're going to sit and we're going to talk through them one by one, both outputs and outcomes. And it's very, very important to look at those in terms of what did we promise we're going to measure? Is there a system in place to measure it? If not, what do we have to do to measure it? And it's really important at that grant launch meeting that every one of those deliverables, every to-do task is assigned to a specific person so that everyone goes away clear about what they're going to have to do. And then we establish the rhythm that is going to keep us in compliance for this grant. So once we know what we have to accomplish, then we need to really talk to each other about, okay, how often do we have to meet in order to be sure we can get that done? Is this something that the program team can track on their own and we just meet every quarter with the whole team? Or can finance sit this one out except for twice a year? Or do we need them at every meeting? How often? Maybe if it's a big state grant, we're going to meet weekly until we establish exactly what we're doing, and then we can taper off down the road. But you really need to set that rhythm in place, because then you're not coming up against those last minute issues that Thomas was talking about, right? You're going to be able to, get to that point with all of those things having been coming to you on a regular basis throughout the grant period, because you're checking on them regularly at those grant compliance meetings.
Definitely. And Rachel just dropped this in the chat, but these are really great things to think about for that grant brief template that we shared earlier. And in relation to what Colette just shared, Kim, we know you work with so many different types of organizations and so many organizations that vary in size. What have you seen the most successful grant teams do differently on their post-award side that a lot of others might overlook?
Yeah, there's several things. The first thing is for everyone to read the grant. A lot of times people come and they say, well, what did we say? What did we say? Everybody gets a copy of the grant. Everybody gets a copy of the grant award. Everybody gets a copy of the NOFO, so they're fully informed. They track all information. They involve all the internal and external stakeholders. So one thing that we see that's very successful is for true collaborations between organizations and their funders and their partners in the grants. So they really want to have a great relationship with not only the funder, but also any potential partners that they have put in the grant. Making sure systems and software is in place to track grant deliverables and finance and everything. Tracking the burn rate, the spend down, are we on track? Are we 9 months into the grant and have we only spent $1,000? That's not a good thing to happen. Making sure they're on top of their audits and staying in compliance. And so that if anything happens, they've got all their paperwork in place. Another thing that we have seen be really successful is using data-driven decision-making. So really working proactively to make steps if they need to change something or if something isn't working well. Again, reaching out to the funder and saying, hey, this isn't working, or this is a little bit off. We'd like to propose this, or we'd like to change this. So really using the data and watching that, everything that they're tracking to figure out what comes next. And finally, making sure they have the capacity to manage the grant. Are there enough staff in place to do that? Is there enough time for them to track everything? Do they have the right people doing it? Do they need to hire an additional person? Is there someone extra in finance they need? Do they need to hire an external consultant? So making sure that they have everything in place that they need to actually carry the grant out and track everything properly.
Definitely. And we were actually just talking about that, Rachel and I, this morning, that it's super important to look at your pre-award phase, your prospecting phase, with that post-award lens, so you don't run into those issues with capacity that you just mentioned. Kim also started to talk about some of those systems and tools that you've got to set up at the start of every grant. And so on to our next section. System, teams, and tools in action. And so I'd like to start with Thomas again. You've seen organizations use everything from Google Sheets to enterprise tools. That's what folks in this room here are using today. What are the key components of a grant management system that really hold up in real life?
Yeah, this is a great question. I do a lot of calls with organizations and they share their screen, and I am always stunned the number of spreadsheets that are open in someone's browser at any given time. I'm curious who has the most spreadsheets open right now on their computer. Who would win that competition right now? But there's, your budget spreadsheets, your task tracking spreadsheets, your grant tracking spreadsheets, your program tracking spreadsheets. And so it's, I think, so many spreadsheets. And this question is only 3. Okay, that's great. That's maybe a record of the fewest I've seen. This question, this is a spectrum here. I'm sure some of you operate entirely out of spreadsheets and you're finding grants and searching for them online. But when you get to really large, sophisticated operations, organizations, millions of dollars operating budgets, the list of software gets very long. And I think this starts generally, some of the first tools I see people use are calendar tools, things, your Google Calendar, your Outlook calendar, just to track your deadlines and tasks. And then generally your first goal is, I need to find revenue funding somehow. And so you either have a CRM to track individual donors. Sometimes you do grants. That's Salesforce, Razor's Edge, Bloomerang, Donor Perfect. It's a long list of CRMs out there. Or you have a grant discovery tool like Instrumentl or one of the many other ones to find that funding to start. And then, you have an accounting software, but initially it's not necessarily that deeply connected to on the grant side of things when you're just starting out. But as you grow, other softwares become really important here. You have shared drives like SharePoint, Google Drive, and Dropbox is really important in centralizing your documents in one place. You also have communication tools like Microsoft Teams and Slack that get your team communicating in a shared channel, sometimes much more efficiently than email. You have project management tools, Monday.com, Asana, and Trello to track more granularly your kind of programs and project details. And then your accounting software becomes really important. Your QuickBooks, your Sage Intacct, your Financial Edge, when you're having to do those grant level allocations and tracking spend down. And more and more these days, I see groups using spend management tools like Ramp, File, and Expensify to track, make it much easier for programs teams to submit receipts and track grant and program level allocations. So it's a very long list. I'm curious if there's anything I did not cover as far as types of software, if anyone's using something not on that list. I think some people said, Google Docs and Notion. There's a long list here. I think in summary, as you're evaluating softwares, as your organization is growing, one of the key questions is asking yourself how the software is going to fit into your workflow, because it's really easy to purchase a software and then it actually creates more work because it's not integrated. You're having to duplicate or have manual work to support it. And so really deeply understand, how it's going to work in your workflow. Can it integrate with your other tools? Does it integrate with your CRM, with your accounting software? Because the more these tools talk to each other, the more streamlined it'll be and the more time it'll save you. Otherwise, it's just a hodgepodge of lots of different softwares that may help to some degree, but can actually add work to your plate rather than saving time.
Definitely. And I think that the thing that we keep hitting on here over and over again is that integration, whether it's of your software, your systems, and your tools, or if it's even of your literal teams, right? Making sure that everyone is talking to each other and has like a shared system for communication. So for Colette here, what are some of those tactics that you've used to help your program staff contribute to reporting without adding more to their plates, right? Because we know that those folks are super busy and on the ground.
Absolutely. I think this one to me comes down to something that should have been started way before you got the grant. And that is really building a grants culture at your organization. So what do I mean by that? In order for the program people to really feel a part of what we're doing, you need to change your way of thinking from how do I get them on board with what I'm doing? Flip that script for yourself and say, how do I help them fulfill the mission? Right? So if you start from that perspective, and if you go to your program people long before you get the grant and you say, tell me what makes you come to work in the morning. Share with me like your best day on the job. What was it that made you feel like, I know I did the right thing today. I helped somebody today. What excites you about your work? I'm here to support you. I'm here to make your program viable. So in order for me to do that, I need to understand your goals. I need to understand your needs, your challenges. And once you do that, once you really educate yourself, then somebody's going to be much more open to having you educate them about how you can best help them, right? You need to really understand their needs. If you don't, you're not going to be at a point where you're going to be able to give them that support that they need. So a program person is going to come back and say, oh gosh, it's really hard for us to get that demographic information. Or, I just don't have time to do all of these surveys. We're not getting them back. You have to be willing to work with them. You have to be willing to troubleshoot with them. You have to let them know when you can be flexible about a deliverable and when we really have to hold tight to this deliverable. So it's back to that communication, right? Back to staying open and talking things through. But I think the most important thing is don't let the tail wag the dog. You are there to support them. And you need to keep that in your own mind at all times. And I think when you really honestly do that, your program people love you and they are right there for you. And they'll come to you and say, that one's really, really hard. I don't know how to get that done. And you train them then to come to you early. So if we need to make a change, that allows me to get back to the funder and say, you know what, things have changed since the proposal. This one's a bit of a struggle. Can we talk about this? And you're not having to fall on your sword at report time because you didn't hear about it in advance, right? So you need to let them know what you require in order to continue to support them and successfully get these grants for you so we can keep repeat funders and that kind of thing, maintain that funder relationship. But it's always from that viewpoint of supporting them and supporting their program, not trying to get them to come along with you. I think that is probably the biggest thing that will get your program staff on your side.
Definitely. And Colette has just talked a lot about how we can really start to build that cohesive and strong grant culture. And I'm curious, Kim, in your consulting work, what happens when that strong grant culture isn't there, right? What are those signals that tell you a grant team is headed for trouble on the post-award side? And how can they course correct early?
Yeah, and Colette, I completely 100% agree with you. I always say the program staff are our friends as grant professionals and grant writers. We definitely need them on board because they're trying to carry out the programs. And often there's a rub between program and fundraising. So we try to bridge that gap. But things that we see potentially that could cause trouble on the post-award side, one of the biggest things is internal staff turnover or people being laid off. So there's no human capital there to do what needs to be done, or there's a transition in staff and no communication in between. So, people leave and then it takes a while for someone else to figure out what they need to do, if they need to do something. And so that takes a little bit of time, which can delay deliverables. It can delay financial reporting. It can delay all kinds of things. So staff turnover is one of the big ones. The next is no mechanism for tracking the grant award, the deliverables, the spending. Some organizations just don't make it a priority. So again, like Colette said, kind of that mind shift in helping the organization realize that everything you're doing now sets you up for the next grant. Everything you're doing now creates that trust and credibility with the funders. So you have to take that proactive approach in figuring out how you need to manage that grant award. Sparse communication is another thing that could lead to trouble. One of the largest things also is waiting to contact the funder if something isn't going well. So you should have that ongoing relationship with a funder. Not every grant goes perfectly. And we know that, and the funders know that too. And if we say it's going perfectly, they know we're probably not being transparent with them. So having that great communication with the funder, federal agency, corporate and foundation funder, letting them know, hey, we're having a challenge. This is what we're experiencing. And more often than not, you're not the first organization that is having that challenge. So when they wait to communicate that something is wrong or something isn't going as planned, that can cause trouble down the road. But if not, it creates trust and credibility again. One other thing that we see that can help with post-award activities is, we call it working across the aisle, the pre and the post-award teams working together. So when our grants management department is working with our pre-award for our clients, that really creates continuity and trust and information sharing and So in any organization, the pre and the post award teams communicating together and working together really helps course correct if something goes awry.
Definitely. And I think that also speaks to like one of the biggest themes that we're hearing in this section, which is just breaking down those silos, whether it's between your literal software tools that you're using, or if it's between, your team and the funders team, or if it's between that pre and post award team. We're consistently hitting that point of how important that cross-functional communication is. And now
Yes.
go ahead.
I just said absolutely.
Absolutely. And before I transition into our next section, I wanted to remind folks that we'll be heading into a live Q&A after this. So if you've got any questions, my teammates Rachel and Nia will be collecting those from the chat. So if, as our wonderful panel here speaks, something comes to mind, feel free to let us know. And our last and final section here is playing the long game, really turning that grant management into growth. And again, I'll start with Thomas here. Based on your research, have you seen post-award needs shift as grant teams grow or mature, and what should they be planning for next?
Yeah, this is a great question. I talk to organizations at many, many different stages in this, and I think there are a couple of trends that I see here. One really big event that changes how a grants team operates and organizations operates is when they win their first government grant. I'm curious if any of you out there have won a government grant at your organization for the first time. I imagine that if you have, it changed your how you do things significantly. Another event, similar event, is when you cross that audit threshold, either the single audit threshold at the federal level or kind of the state level. If any of you have crossed that threshold, that also kind of invites an additional level of scrutiny that makes things much more complicated. And, one of the big challenges here that I see over and over again when organizations do this is really comes on the financial side when organizations are not really tracking on the transaction level their grant allocations. I know Shaylee mentioned this earlier, but a lot of people just have in QuickBooks or in Sage Intacct, they have expenses, but it's not clear, which grant they're allocated to. And this makes reporting and reimbursements really, really challenging, if not impossible. And the process of implementing this at your organization is quite painful, but really necessary as you kind of mature in that way. And so I think that's really one trend I have seen here. And the other is that, this is maybe an obvious point, but as your team grows, you just have more people involved. You have more people on the development team, more people on the finance team, more people out there doing programs. And that just makes the collaboration complexity even stronger. And so we've talked a lot about ownership and clear ownership. And I think we've talked about that on the transactional level, saying this person needs to do this. But what I really see as organizations mature is a shift from a world where the development office is, just focused on raising money and the programs team is out there doing the programs, but where this becomes a shared goal. Because you can raise all the money you want in the world and win grants, but if it's not really funding the type of work that your organization can do to have the biggest impact, then it's really not the way that you can optimize your mission at your organization. And so as operations get more sophisticated, what I see is the program staff, we're just talking about this, but get much more involved in understanding which grants should we apply to, which metrics do we want to track, what goals do we want to have, and how can we then tell this really effective story that the money that we're raising is having that impact? That's, I think, the really big key here. And it's a hard story to tell in a compelling way. But if you can do that, that is really exciting for funders to be able to see that. And they're going to want to give you money again and again in an ideal world. And so I think the shift here from more transactional, just fundraising and doing the work is coming together and saying, the work that we can do is, multiplied by the funds that we raise, and how can we share this goal together?
Definitely. And I saw Kim and Colette both kind of smile a little at the mention of federal grants and kind of how that really changes an organization's complexity and what they need. Is there any color that you folks would like to add there?
I was just smiling because we have a smaller client who just received their first federal grant a couple months ago. And so it's, there is a lot of documentations and policy and procedures and things that they have to set up, but yeah, it's a lot. And I'm
Definitely.
watching some of the comments.
Definitely. It's like a massive shift.
I think any government grant, especially one of any size, does put you into a brand new place. And, I found that it kind of creates an opportunity even before you get it. If you can make yourself government grant ready, even with grants that don't require that level of compliance, get ahead of it before you even start applying for that. Start thinking through, what would I have to do if this was broken down for the federal government? If you can set that up before you are behind the 8 ball with a government grant, you're going to be in a much, much better position, because yeah, it's going to demand a whole different level of compliance. And then you can make it scalable for your organization. Start it small.
Definitely.
Yeah, Colette, I agree with this particular one. We started working with them actually over a year ago. And so they weren't ready last year. And so we said, hey, you're not ready this year, but let's do all the things and help you put them in place to be ready for this year. And luckily, it was one of the grants that didn't get canceled. And we helped the client write it, and they did get it. So very exciting. But it took a while to get them ready to apply for the grant and then now to manage it.
That's great. It's a process. You can't do it overnight.
Definitely. And in the same realm, Colette, you talked about these big shifts that you should be making in advance of those federal grants. And Kim, you just explained that you had to do the exact same thing. So for Colette, looking back, what is one shift you've made in how you manage grants that's had the biggest impact on your organization's success?
I think for us, it's been a process of looking at each step and creating a workflow that is very specific to that step. And that means getting buy-in from everyone, which, was a process for us of me going into senior leadership, to our board of directors, to different program staff, and talking to them about what I thought we could manage. But even before that, starting with my own supervisor and our CEO and saying, what's your goal? Why did you hire me? What do you want? What will make you feel like we're successful? And then when I got those answers, I was able to go back and say, okay, I think in order to get there, these are the steps we're going to have to take. So then you start implementing all of those steps. For us, in the post-award world, which is what we're really talking about today, it was creating that whole process from you got the grant to closed, right? So it was the deliverables, figuring out what is our evaluation process? What are the metrics? Do we need to create a whole new system for that? Or is there a system in place for that? Putting each piece of that together, the spend down, that was very new for my agency when we first started doing that. We hadn't, been able to work in that world very much before that. So that was a big piece of it. But as I've said, and I didn't think about this a lot until we were talking today, but I feel like so many of the right answers for post-award management start in pre-award management. It's how you set yourself up, right? If you wait until you've got it, it's too late to do some of these things, or it can feel very late to do some of them. You really need to think through all the way from the beginning. And, so talking carefully to the program staff, to the finance staff, we have a whole approval process now that goes through senior leadership before we even apply. There are certain things I have to set out. I have to talk to the program people. I talk to my boss. Maybe it has to go to the CEO or to the whole senior leadership team. Maybe not, depends on the grant. But, we put all of those steps in place. And when you get that, again, I come back to what I said in a previous question, it gives you clarity. And clarity is what really makes the biggest difference. You know your role in the process, and people are excited about it. It's the change I've seen with that level of organization within the agency is that the program people are proactively excited. They'll send me grants that they find. Can we apply for this? Is this something we could do? Or they'll, come to me and they'll say, I wanted to send you these pictures from our retreat this last weekend. This is what the kids were doing. This is, what our bereaved spouses were doing. All of those kinds of things start coming back to me because we're all marching down the same aisle. So get a structure together, and it may be a slow build. You don't have to build the whole airplane today. Often at Yolo Cares, we have been building the airplane while we're flying it. It happens. We all have been there. It just happens, no matter how careful you try to be. But if you can get ahead just a little bit at a time on everything from how do we decide what grant to go after to what is the evaluation process, you're going to be in a much, much different place than you are without that kind of structure.
Definitely. And this response leads me perfectly to my final question before we open up the floor for some of our audience questions. But Colette, you mentioned, building that airplane and how sometimes you're building it on the fly. And we talked about this kind of race metaphor earlier. These two tie together pretty nicely, I think. Kim, grant writing often feels like a sprint, but grant management is definitely a marathon. So how are you coaching the teams that you're consulting with to balance some of those mindsets?
Yeah, we say even on the pre and the post award side, the grants are the long game. Everything that we're doing now is laying the foundation for future work. So on the pre-award side, if we receive or don't receive a grant, nothing is done in vain. I always say that nothing is written in vain because we are doing something that we can potentially use in the next grant. For post-award, some of the grants can be a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. So we have the luxury at Kim Joyce and Associates of being the external consultants, the experts. We're very transparent with our clients and let them know, hey, everything you're doing now, step by step by step, is going to build upon, each activity. And again, reaching out to the funders and establishing those relationships early. So it's just letting them know all the little things that they need to do and the timeline in which they need to do it, and showing them that it's not just the quarterly reports. If the only time they're reaching out to the funder is during the quarterly reports or the annual reports, it's not enough. So what are all of those activities and what needs to take place? And we really believe that grants management, it's really a report card for the next grant, because we want them to get the next grant. And, showing that they have a great track record and capability to carry out the awards is really something that takes time, and it's proactive work. And like Colette said, getting them excited about, I want everyone to be as excited about grants as I am. I know that isn't always the case. And as excited about pre and post award activities. And I know that's not always the case, but educating our clients and, really coaching them on how to take all of those steps along the way, and that every step is important, and just making sure that everything is outlined and very transparent as possible.
Definitely. And I think that is such a good way to kind of summarize everything that we've talked about today, right? The idea that we're going to put into action some of these smaller tips or some of these smaller suggestions, and the hope is that they stack on top of each other, and that eventually we're able to run that 26.2 miles, to run that marathon, to fly that plane, even if we're building it as we go. And with that, I'd love to transition us to some of our audience questions. We've got plenty. The chat has been super active as you folks have provided your sage wisdom. So to start, I'll start with a question for all of you. Summer is looking for advice for post-award management across a large staff. So what are some tips or advice that you could provide specifically when you're managing a really, really large team?
One of the first things we do is set up a workflow document, and that has all of the assignments and who's responsible for what, and that communication plan, and making sure that everyone is crystal clear on what they have to do. So setting up the workflow, it's a visual document that we have, and then making sure that everyone is present for those particular meetings, and making sure that everyone knows the value and the importance of attending and being present.
Definitely. Anything to add, Colette and Tony?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing about, that this is where your workflow, we call it our deliverables, whatever you want to name it. That's where it really comes in handy, because you can get everyone on there with their name attached to their assignments, with action items and due dates. It's all part of that. And that helps everyone to understand where they need to be. The other thing I will say, whether you're using Instrumentl or another system, if you can really make use of the task feature, assign those tasks and get the reminders going out so that you can stay ahead, because when you have a lot of people to keep track of, it's easy to get lost in, oh my gosh, I needed that, I never got that from them. You want to utilize that function so that you can remind them if necessary that you're waiting on that, and escalate if and when you need to. But that's a big and important tool to use, I think, when you have a big team.
And I'll just tack on a little bit at the end here. I think meeting people where they are, a lot of organizations, if you can get, those tasks, however they exist, onto people's actual calendars that they're looking at every day, rather than having to go to another system, as Colette mentioned, email reminders, and set due dates in advance of when you actually need things, a couple weeks, because people will inevitably wait to the last minute and be late, and you don't want that to be your true deadline. So I think adding buffers in like that and meeting people where they already are can be really big tactical helps too.
Yeah, anything you can automate too, like reminders and, several weeks out. And even with our workflow, it is very specific, how many days we need this in advance and how many days each person has to complete each document. So the more specific you are. And one last thing, we work with so many different organizations across the country and so many teams, and we have dozens of employees here too. Everyone gives and receives information in different ways. So I think it's important to figure out how your team needs to be reminded, and how they would like to be reminded, and what type of information they need. So drilling down a little bit further, really getting to know the people on your team and what helps them be successful.
Definitely. And on the flip side of that, I've got these questions from Roxanne and Ruby. Do you folks have any advice on how to help a grant staff person that's managing a lot by themselves? So, for example, someone who's managing grants, but also maybe their fundraising events, and they're also kind of doing it all by themselves. That feels like a little bit of a different skill set.
Oh, I have felt that pain. I've been in that seat before at different times in my life, and it really is a challenge. And again, this is where your calendar, your time management is everything. One of the things that helped me is I like to have, I like color. Color helps me get things straight in my mind. And so I fill my calendar with not just my meetings, but I block out my work time, and I block it out. Since we have Instrumentl, I now have matched the color on the calendar to, the type of status that it is on, the status type task that it is on Instrumentl. So every one of those status things in your tracker has a color attached to it. Now my calendar matches that. So I know I'm working on planning, or I'm working on researching, or I'm on an awarded active grant today that maybe I'm doing reporting work on. And I plunk that time in my calendar. Now, not only is that helping me stay on track, but it helps me when I realize I am in a point where there's not enough time to actually do what someone above me is expecting to be done. Excuse me. So it lets me get out ahead of time and go to that person and say, I need help, or we need to prioritize. You only have so much time. We would love to all know how to make more hours in the day, but because that's not something you can do, you need to find a way to make sure that you are accurately assessing how much time it's going to take you to do each of those pieces. And if you're at a point where you know you cannot physically do more, and that includes making sure you don't burn out and making sure you have enough work-life balance that they aren't going to lose you entirely within the year, right? So you're making your boundaries on it. Then you can go and you can say, look, this isn't possible. I either need more help, or we need to take one of these things off my table, or we need to start prioritizing which one gets done first. Can you help me with that? It's not going with a complaint. It's going to ask for help to prioritize your workload, because you will find that, no good deed goes unpunished. And if you're really good and you can get a lot done in a short amount of time, they will just keep asking more often. So you need to learn how to create boundaries and a system for yourself. I hope that's helpful.
I feel your pain too. I've worked inside organizations before, and you're 5 different people doing 5 different jobs at once, and it's very difficult. But communicating with your supervisor, like Colette said, I use the color coding too. I have a lot of pink on my calendar and a lot of other colors. But and then if it's possible to track your time, I don't know if you have a time tracking mechanism, but if you are working 60 hours in 1 week, then having that data to be able to go to your supervisor with some sort of solution, like Colette said, possibly having another staff person, or maybe shifting your duties to someone else. But and any type of calendar or other tracking tool should be able to help you.
Definitely. And with that, I was so engrossed in our conversation, I'm realizing we are about to hit the end of our time together. So before some final announcements, I would love if folks could just share some love in the chat for our panelists. Thank you folks so much for being here and providing your sage advice and your sage wisdom to everyone in the room. It was so fun to watch the folks respond to your expertise today. And so with that, another place to share some love. We've shared a